My name is Robert Waters, and in this video I'll be discussing monitoring and compliance. To ensure that all federal statutory and regulatory requirements have been fulfilled, HUD will monitor recipients and subrecipients. However, recipients should also self-monitor and must also monitor their subrecipients at least annually to ensure that they and all of its subrecipients are adhering to statutory and regulatory requirements. Monitoring will help all parties ensure that the recipients implement the project as indicated in the executed grant agreement and APR, that grant funds are drawn in a timely fashion, and that the recipient is achieving the program goals as set forth in the project application. Areas that should be addressed as part of monitoring include program participants' eligibility, program components, eligible costs, project progress, meeting the match and maintaining appropriate documentation of match, subrecipient management and recipient management, financial management, cost of allowability, procurement standards, equipment and equipment disposition, and other federal requirements. Recipients and subrecipients are responsible for ensuring their projects serve only eligible program participants and for securing and maintaining documentation that verifies eligibility. Here are a few examples of typical compliance issues related to verifying homeless status and disability. Case notes do not illustrate program participants' situation, barriers, needs, and other factors. Initial consultation files are not dated or signed by the caseworker. The chronology of homeless episodes are not clearly documented. Disability is not documented, or documentation is signed by a person not credentialed to make a diagnosis. Recipients and subrecipients must conduct an annual assessment of service needs of project participants. The supporting services must be adjusted accordingly. Common compliance issues are individual supportive services plans are not in program participants' files, ongoing program participants' annual assessments are not completed and or documented in the file. Recipients and subrecipients should monitor themselves annually, and recipients must monitor subrecipients annually to verify that their financial systems and documentation are sufficient to substantiate the use of grant funds and are operated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and applicable federal requirements. Examples of financial compliance issues are missing or insufficient documentation for incurred expenses and or ineligible expenses, drawing a percentage of the grant each month with no support documentation or why funds were drawn from locks, reimbursement of expenses incurred outside of the grant term, lack of financial oversight for subrecipients, salary costs cannot be tied to any eligible grant expense, paying rent to someone who is not the property owner. Recipients and subrecipients should monitor at least annually to check that income verification is completed as required, that rent and occupancy charges are calculated properly, that income and rent documentation is maintained, and that amounts paid for with CoC program funds are within allowable limits. Examples of common rent compliance issues are overcharging rent, inadequate or no income verification, not reviewing program participant income annually or when a household's income changes, or charging fees other than rent or occupancy charges. Recipients and subrecipients should monitor to verify that appropriate and sufficient match has been provided and documented for each grant. Here are some examples of match compliance issues. Insufficient match. In-kind services provided by a third party without an MOU are counted as match. Ineligible sources are used as match, or match is not adequately tracked or documented. Recipients and subrecipients should monitor and ensure that staff time and associated costs charged to the project are explicitly tracked by eligible activity. For staff who perform operations and other functions such as supportive services and/or who work in multiple projects, Costs must be split between functions and documented to substantiate how costs were assigned. Some common compliance issues related to staff time documented are: grant files do not include records documenting the specific hour staff work. Timesheets are not signed or dated by supervisor. Staff time records do not indicate how the time relates to eligible activities. Salary costs must be directly linked to serving program participants or other eligible costs in the CoC program. Records do not demonstrate that case managers work with program participants during the time charged to the project, or records do not show cost documentation associated with staff time that was charged to the project. Specific cost documentation, such as payroll costs, must be used to substantiate the amounts drawn for staff costs. For example, grant draws must be based on the actual rather than the estimated fringe. Recipients and subrecipients must also comply with other program requirements as specified in the CoC Program interim rule. Some of these requirements are described in this section, but recipients should review subpart F of the interim rule to get a further understanding of the requirements. Examples of conflict of interest as listed in the interim rule are: procurement. Recipients must comply with codes of conduct and conflict of all interest requirements under 24 CFR 85.36 or CFR 84.42. No continuum of care board member may participate in discussions or influence decisions concerning the award of a grant or other financial benefits to the organization that the member represents. An organizational conflict of interest arises when the recipient or subrecipient is potentially unable to render impartial assistance in the provision of any type or amount of assistance under this part, or when a covered person's objectivity in performing work with respect to any activity assisted under this part might be otherwise impaired. No covered person or those with whom he or she has immediate family or business ties may obtain a financial interest or benefit from an assisted activity, contract, subcontract, or agreement where the covered person is in a position to participate in the decision-making process or has responsibilities with respect to assisted activities. Recipients and subrecipients must provide for the participation of not less than one homeless or formerly homeless individual on the agency board or equivalent policy-making entity. To the maximum extent practicable, involve homeless individuals and families through employment, volunteer services, or otherwise in constructing, rehabilitating, maintaining, and operating the project, and in providing supportive services for the project. On the slide are other program requirements that recipients and subrecipients should be aware of.